changing the tempo slightly. So we're moving from a lot of conversations are in the blockchain space to something more in the crypto and Bitcoin space. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Vays here. He's a former Wall Street man, if I can put it that way. And when I asked him where he lives at the moment, he said, I'm nomadic. I don't really have a home or a country right now because I'm traveling so much. So he is here from overseas, and please welcome him up on stage. Thank you. It's great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the conference. Very happy to be in South Africa, my first time in South Africa. So I'm really looking forward to it. Spent a little bit of time in Cape Town and now seeing Johannesburg. I'm going to jump right into the presentation, but how many of you are familiar with my work, seen me on YouTube, read some of my articles? All right, great. I don't really consider myself an OG, but I have now been around for more than half of Bitcoin's lifetime, which is great. I have a YouTube channel, and I organize conferences around the world as well. Unconfiscatable, Las Vegas, Understanding Bitcoin in Malta, and the Financial Summit for traders and hedge funds. So the name of this presentation is Bitcoin Value Proposition, and I will be focusing on Bitcoin specifically because to me it all started with Bitcoin, and it will probably end with Bitcoin as well, but I already see it, but sometimes it needs to be explained. And what you see behind me is the price history of Bitcoin. I really should update that chart. It kind of ends in the beginning of 2019. We've gone up and down since then, but the general trend is the same. But we're going to start with the point of where it all began, and that is Satoshi releasing the white paper in October of 2008, with the Genesis block launching a few months later. And in the abstract, he explains it very, very clearly what he's releasing. So I will just read a small part. Digital signatures provide part of the solution, but the main benefits are lost if a trusted third party is required to prevent double spending. We propose a solution to the double spending problem using a peer-to-peer network. The network timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that can't be changed without redoing the proof of work. Now, in order to write his white paper, in order to launch the system, Satoshi had to use work that came before him. One of those is from Adam Back and Hashcash, who's currently the CEO of Blockstream. We'll get back to that in a second. Probably one of the most interesting parts about the Satoshi white paper is the word blockchain is never mentioned in the Satoshi white paper, those of you that have read it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. So when Bitcoin first comes out, the entire 2009 is just an interesting thing. It has no financial value. You are actually creating Bitcoin, you're mining Bitcoin, you're paying electricity. And that is the part that made Bitcoin decentralized. The fact that it had no value. You had to always spend value, not knowing if you're ever going to get anything for it. But the first financial use case of Bitcoin was suggested in very late 2010 by a Bitcoin Core developer at the time named Amir Taki. And he suggested it because WikiLeaks, which was releasing some not very flattering documents for the US government, was looking to get shut down. The US Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, all payment methods that people were using to donate money to WikiLeaks to keep their servers up and running got shut down. And Amir Taki proposed, hey, WikiLeaks should start accepting Bitcoin in order to finance themselves. And Satoshi immediately replied, and he was not happy with the idea. He said, no, don't bring it on. Bitcoin is too young, it's too fragile, and we don't necessarily want this kind of attention. So WikiLeaks actually did not accept Bitcoin as payment right away. A few months later, Silk Road launched. And Silk Road was a way for people to, again, use Bitcoin as a transactional currency. So both of these suggestions are a use case of Bitcoin that allow it to compete today with our general financial system. And that is the censorship-resistant value transfer, or this uncensorable nature of Bitcoin. Now, Silk Road really took off when a senator in New York named Chuck Schumer went on TV complaining that, oh my God, everyone is buying this stuff on Silk Road, but how do you get to it? You have to use Tor, and you have to use this currency called Bitcoin. So in about a 2-minute video interview, he managed to do something that takes me 40 minutes to do. He did it basically in about 2 minutes, introduced Bitcoin to the world, and got the price of Bitcoin to its first bubble of $30 from $1, and then it had its biggest crash from $30 back to $2. And while I personally heard about Bitcoin during that time, this censorship-resistant value transfer use case did not resonate with me as to how important it is. Again, being in a developed country, I think I was working at JP Morgan at the time. Bear Stearns had already collapsed a year earlier, which is where I was before JP Morgan. 2012 was pretty much uneventful, but it was 2013 that for me personally made all the difference in the world and why I'm standing here today. Because something happened in April of 2013, and it took place in Europe. More specifically, it took place in Cyprus. The Cyprus banking system shut down, and the European government, along with the Cyprus government, decided to confiscate 50% of everybody's money above 100,000 euros. So if you lived in Cyprus and you had a business bank account or a personal bank account, and that bank account had 200,000 euros, the government just took 50,000 euros. And this is something that really, really bothered me. Even being in the US, it bothered me. Wait a minute. Developed countries' government can simply go into your bank account and take your money because they want to. And this is where I realized that Bitcoin is the only solution to this problem. Because Bitcoin is the first asset that has ever existed that is unconfiscatable if you properly protect it. So there is a little bit of an asterisk there. Best way to protect it, don't tell anybody you have it. But a little too late for some of us, but not for all of us, right? Now, you do have to properly protect it. Now, it's not just from the banking system. Here's a statistic from the United States that in 2014, I actually want to get the latest numbers because it has been 5 years. In 2014, law enforcement confiscated more money than burglars and robberies did. So there was more money taken by police and other law enforcement agencies than you getting robbed, whether on the street or from your house. So this unconfiscatable property is very, very important. Now, what happens when you don't properly protect your Bitcoin? Well, when you don't properly protect it, the government can confiscate it. When Silk Road was eventually shut down in October of 2013, the US law enforcement were able to confiscate 144,000 Bitcoin, which they subsequently sold at the end of the bear market for only $48 million instead of waiting a couple of years and benefiting up to the tune of $2.4 billion. And if this article waited about 3 days, that would have been about $4 billion. But the article was close at picking the top. And not only that, not only could it be confiscated if you're not properly protecting it, it could also be hacked away. How many of you remember Mt. Gox? I don't know if anyone was involved. I know at least 1 or 2 people in here were. But that's another way to really lose your Bitcoin, because with these properties of being unconfiscatable and being censorship-resistant value transfer, you have a lot of responsibility. So you are your own bank. You are responsible for that Bitcoin. So if it's hacked, there is nothing you can do about it. And when Mark Karpelès initially bought Mt. Gox, a lot of people don't realize that Mark Karpelès did not create Mt. Gox. He bought it from a man named Jabe McCaleb. And a few months after he bought it, there was an email exchange that you see behind me on the screen where he's asking Jeb McCaleb, where's the 80,000 missing Bitcoin that's supposed to be there? So Mark Karpelès never had a chance. He buys it with 80,000 missing Bitcoin. The suggestions were not very good. Hey, why don't you just use a bot that Mt. Gox has? I think that ran into a little bit of a problem later on. And then a few months later, he gets hacked for approximately 250,000 Bitcoin. And early investigation said that the hack might have come from Jeb McCaleb's one of his laptops that still had admin rights to the system. So there's lots of things that are going on there. Maybe we'll find out eventually whenever Mark Karpelès gets out of a Japanese prison. So that led to our second big bubble of Bitcoin, where the price of Bitcoin fell from approximately $1,300 all the way down to $150 at the end of in the beginning of 2015, and stuck around there for most of 2015. There was another very important event for Bitcoin's life, probably one of the most critical events in Bitcoin's life, at least for me. Once again, took place in 2015, because when you had that bear market for a year and a half, you really start to doubt, is Bitcoin eventually going to reach the promise that we all expected back in the early days? And that came thanks to Greece. The events of the Greek banking shutdown and almost getting kicked out of the Eurozone, or voluntarily leaving, really solidified the fact of how important Bitcoin is. And what happened during the Greek banking shutdown? Well, for starters, both properties of being unconfiscatable and censorship resistant were on display. The European government, alongside the Greek government and the financial industry, only allowed people to withdraw 60 euros a day from the ATM. It didn't matter how much money you had in the bank. Every day you were only allowed to withdraw 60 euros. Now, 60 euros will buy a lot more here in South Africa than in Europe. So the equivalent would be probably about maybe 100 Rand per day. That's all you would be able to withdraw out of your ATM system. And then after like a week or two of that insanity, they said, hey, we'll now allow you to withdraw 420 euros, but for the entire week. So what happens Monday morning when the banks open? Well, that's what happens. Everyone's running to the ATM to withdraw their 420 euros for the day, for the week, because they don't know if there'll be enough cash in the system to withdraw the following day. And these pictures are not much different than pictures throughout history since the invention of photography. That picture, that is 1907 in New York, one of the biggest financial panics the US saw. Everyone always talks about the Great Depression, 1929. They always forget about 1907. If you want to look up the history of the Federal Reserve and the dollar and the US financials, look into the crash of 1907. It led directly to the creation of the Federal Reserve because the banks needed that lender of last resort because of what happened in 1907. Those middle pictures is Weimar Germany in the 1920s with the German hyperinflation. You end up basically burning paper money for heat because it's more useful. The bottom pictures are the 1930s during the Great Depression in the US. Again, everyone's burning their banknotes. And here's your neighboring country. This is Zimbabwe in 2007 with their hyperinflation. Not much difference in these pictures, is there? It's basically the newer ones are in color and the older ones are going to be black and white. Since we're talking about the 1930s, and this was already mentioned in earlier presentations, let's talk about what happened in the 30s and how it changed the entire world. And this was the elimination of the gold backing paper currency. So in 1933, FDR made an announcement under an executive order from the president that all gold will now be confiscated by the US government under a $10,000 penalty, which was a lot back then. We're talking almost 100 years it will be, I actually can't wait to get to 100-year anniversary of this order. I think, especially in our space, in the finance space, it will be a very interesting year. And I'm very curious where Bitcoin will be in 2033 on this 100-year anniversary. Very, very curious. And after 10 years in prison. So what does that mean, losing the gold backing of the paper currency? How many of you are familiar with the book, The Bitcoin Standard? How many of you have read it? All right. Strongly recommend this book. Saifedean did an amazing job. Most of this book just talks about the history of money. 10 to 11 chapters out of 14 is just about the history of money. Only the last few chapters talk about Bitcoin. So let me read a few quick things from the book. Actually, I'm going to skip that slide, go straight to here. Hard money, by taking the question of supply out of the hands of governments and their economists, would force everyone to be productive to society instead of seeking to get rich through the fool's errand of monetary manipulation. International economic summits are convened where world leaders try to negotiate each other's acceptable currency devaluation, making the value of the currency an issue of geopolitical importance. So I've only been here in South Africa for about 8 or 9 days, and even I was watching the rand just spike up to 17 rand per US dollar and then drop right back down to 15. I don't know if I didn't tweet this out, but in the Telegram groups, I'm a trader, and it hit a very interesting critical point, and I said, hey, I think that's it. You guys should, the rand should appreciate a little bit over the next few weeks, but after that, nobody knows. And honestly, it's not a very good sign based on what that chart looks like. Oh, let me go back one more. Nope, we're going here. So here's what happens. For every other money, as its value rises, those who can produce it will start producing more of it, whether it's rhinestone, seashell, silver, gold, copper, or government money. Everyone will have an incentive to try and produce more. Bitcoin is the hardest money ever invented. Growth in its value cannot possibly increase its supply. It can only make the network more secure and immune to attack. And this makes Bitcoin fundamentally different from every other money. Basically, prior to Bitcoin, the hardest money was gold. As the value of gold rises, everyone wants to produce more gold. But it's not easy to produce more gold. You have to put in a lot of energy and a lot of effort to create that gold. And you can open up more mines, but the more gold you mine, the less gold there's going to be left in the ground. So Bitcoin takes this to another level. And the first two properties of Bitcoin we already talked about, Bitcoin being unconfiscatable and Bitcoin being uncensorable. Those properties come from the fact that Bitcoin is the most decentralized product we've ever seen. Let's hope it stays that way. And because it's decentralized, it's impossible, or almost impossible, to change the rules of Bitcoin code. And so when Satoshi launched Bitcoin code and those rules, he created it with a finite supply of Bitcoin of 21 million Bitcoins, each one divisible to 100 million pieces, known as today as Satoshis. And that is what gave it its hard money property. He could have launched Bitcoin with 2% inflation. He could have launched Bitcoin and said, hey, you get 50 Bitcoins per block forever. So it would have been infinite inflation, but at a decelerating rate, which also would not have been as bad. But he created these halvings, setting that monetary policy in stone. And he knew it right away. Here's a quote from Satoshi from June 2010, 6 months after Bitcoin launched. The nature of Bitcoin is such that once version 0.1 was released, the core design was set in stone for the rest of its lifetime. He knew it. And the immutability, this immutability, is not a feature of the Bitcoin software, which is trivial to change for anyone with coding skills, but rather is grounded in the economics of the currency and the network, and stems from the difficulty of getting every member of the network to adopt the same change to the software. Okay? I wrote some articles a long time ago about the use cases of Bitcoin. By the way, all my presentations are publicly available. You just got to Google Tone Vays and the word Prezi, which is the software that I do this on, Prezi, and you can find all of these slides. So these three properties separate Bitcoin from every other financial instrument today. Unconfiscatable, uncensorable, and uninflatable, the fact that it's hard money, unprintable, uninflatable. These words are new. Hopefully we'll get unconfiscatable into the dictionary one of these days. It's a funny little side story. It was actually someone in this audience that messaged me. We took a look on March 18th, 2018, almost 2 years ago to the day, and said, hey, Tone, you always talk about unconfiscatable. The domain's available. If you don't buy it right now, I will. I bought the domain, didn't know what I was going to do with it, and today Unconfiscatable is a conference, annual conference that educates about Bitcoin. So that's my little tie to South Africa and the brand Unconfiscatable. So that's where Bitcoin competes right now. Where is Bitcoin not competing great, but it's strongly improving? When I made this slide, it was over a year and a half ago now. And Bitcoin was not very scalable. We were still going through full blocks and high transaction fees. And wasn't very fungible, wasn't very private. But Bitcoin is improving very, very quickly. Scalability, fungibility, privacy, all of that is almost here. It's almost here. People should be using Bash32 addresses. SegWit got in. The Lightning Network's been being built out for over a year and a half now. Once the next soft fork comes in with Schnorr signatures, it'll make Bitcoin more private. It'll make it more scalable. We have bulletproofs, Tumblebit coming, new improvements to the software are being worked on every single day by some of the smartest engineers in the space. So I would say another 6 months to a year, maybe a little more, and we should definitely be ready for mass adoption and some good fungibility. Lots of more people are starting to use coin joins to try and give you that fungibility. Andreas Antonopoulos, who I know spoke at this conference a few years ago, had a very interesting story. I heard him say on stage once how at one point the US government wanted to clean up its paper currency, and they wanted to install these machines at businesses that would track how much. Apparently every single US dollar bill has traces of drugs and cocaine on them. So they wanted to put these machines in to try to measure, hey, you paying with something with a $100 bill, they would measure how much cocaine residue is on this $100 bill. And if it's above a certain limit, they wouldn't be able to accept that bill. They would consider it to be like a dirty bill. And then the US government realized that would destroy the economics of the country. Because now a $100 bill would be worth $90 in some places and $110 in others. And you're basically losing the feature of a unit of account and fungibility. So even the government money, even governments understand that your money has to be fungible. Your $1 bill, your 100 Rand note has to equal 100 Rand. It can't equal something else. And that's where fungibility is really important. It's not about hiding those $100 bills that happen to be used somewhere else. It's about a $100 bill having to be worth $100 in order to keep your economy fully functional. So here we go. Lots of articles written even a long time ago now. It's been a year. And you can see the yellow line. Can I use a pointer? You can see this is SegWit, and we're now above 50%. We're now close to 60. SegWit transactions. Look, transactions did get expensive and they did get slow. But they've been very, very cheap and very, very fast to the point where the Lightning Network doesn't have to be used. Now, Now we need to talk about where does Bitcoin struggle? Where is Bitcoin still having problems? And obviously, the volatility. We're watching this volatility unfold today. People like Paul Krugman and Nouriel Roubini and Joseph Stiglitz, who was mentioned earlier, Warren Buffett, they have a point. Bitcoin is volatile. It's very volatile. It's hard to use Bitcoin as a day-to-day currency. But it's only volatile for larger priced items. Today, when a value of Bitcoin is $9,000 US, your cup of coffee will not change in price that much if Bitcoin goes up 10% or 20%. In the future, when one Bitcoin is over $100,000, hopefully sooner than later, you know, a $1,000 purchase, a $2,000 purchase will not be that volatile with a 10% move in the asset, even on a short-term basis. So as more and more people start using Bitcoin, as more and more value ends up on chain, Bitcoin will become less and less volatile for other purchases. And we can see it that the volatility of Bitcoin will eventually approach the volatility of the dollar-euro pair, which is one of the most liquid pairs we have. But here's where Bitcoin does have an advantage. This is a giant list of hyperinflations since 1900s. Only the first one. This is France in 1795. We have Germany in 1920, Austria in 1921. Lots of them happened in the 20s, then 40s, all throughout. Lots happened in the 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I got that from a book, and the book was written right after Zimbabwe had its hyperinflation. So I had to look for these. So all of these in blue, these are all hyperinflation incidents. Zimbabwe again. Right now we're watching it in Venezuela and Turkey and others. So what was my definition for hyperinflation? A greater than 50% devaluation of your currency in approximately 30 days. If your currency lost half of its value, if you became 50% poorer with your savings in less than 30 days, your country is going through hyperinflation. It's not as bad as these and this. It's not as bad as Venezuela, but it's bad enough to affect your life. And this is the latest in Venezuela. This is the latest in Zimbabwe. And most of hyperinflation incidents are political events. No matter how much money the US prints, doesn't seem to cause any inflation because that money is being absorbed globally. There's also crazy one-day shocks in developed nations. This is what happened when the Brexit vote went against the consensus. And the pound moved 10% in one day against the US dollar and the euro. And when the Swiss peg broke, Swiss franc moved 30% against the euro, which is insane in the European region. And the biggest issue, of course, with Bitcoin is coin security. This goes back to the double-edged sword of being unconfiscatable. If you don't properly protect your Bitcoin, it will be hacked. Exchanges are most vulnerable because that's where there is a large amount of Bitcoin being stored. Hacks could be internal, could be external, and solutions are getting better, but it's hard. We have some good hardware wallets, cold storage, but constant incidents of getting hacked. And these are the things that will slow down Bitcoin adoption. This is how it competes. This is on the verge of being solved, but this still has some time. So I think it will take a little bit longer for people to really get used to Bitcoin and start to adopt it. So now let's take a few minutes and talk about things that will drive this mass adoption. And as unfortunate it is to say, a lot of it will come from the inefficiencies in the traditional financial world. But my biggest one is my continued expectation that the European common currency is not sustainable long term. Each country has its own leaders, they have their own languages, they have their own, they're very different. Greece is not like Germany. very different mentality, very different lifestyles. Having this common currency that is controlled by politicians and economists, I don't believe is going to last. So I think that a breakup or even a country like Greece leaving the European Union would significantly make Europeans be interested in Bitcoin. We saw this in 2015 during the Greek banking shutdown. Italy was close to a banking holiday, and that's when neighboring countries start to say, hey, I want access to my money if my banks close. And I think that Europe will be big for mass adoption. Now, another area that could drive people into Bitcoin is the continued fight against cash. This elimination of cash is potential driver into Bitcoin. Now, this is a great article from the Harvard Business Review, and they talked about the 3 reasons why governments want to eliminate cash. One of them is, remember those pictures that we had that I showed you earlier, with everyone rushing to the bank to withdraw their cash? Well, if there's no cash, there's no ATM machines. Those pictures will never be seen again. There is nothing to withdraw if there's no cash. Also, if there's no cash, the government can set any monetary policy that they like. They can put negative interest rates in. Hey, you have too much money in your bank account. We want you to spend that money. We will tax you 5% of your money every year. We'll just take it unless you go out and spend it. And you don't have the ability to exit the system. You can exit it by buying real estate. You can exit it by buying other things, but they're registered things, so they can tax those things as well if they don't feel like you're spending the money. Now, of course, the biggest reason is every government in the world thinks that every one of their citizens is evading taxes, and that's why they want cash. More true in some countries than others. Here is India, where it's estimated that 30 to 44% of GDP is not being calculated because of their cash economy. Also probably why India attempted to just eliminate their biggest bills, which was their 500 and 1,000 rupee note, which are about $5 or so. And they said they were going to replace it with a 2,000 rupee note, except no banks had the 2,000 rupee note, or not enough of them, and it created a giant insanity. Now, some governments have to spend more money maintaining a cash economy. China, India, most of Europe, for reasons I don't actually understand. Mexico, this is, if it's in red, that means it's very expensive to keep cash going, preventing counterfeit, securing cash, things like that. Blue, that means it's cheap. And this is a great metric showing you which countries are technologically ready to eliminate cash. And you can see Belgium, Germany, France, they are ready technologically to eliminate cash, and they would benefit because they're in red. India would actually benefit the most because they're all the way on the right, but they're also all the way down, so they're not technologically ready. Ironically, that's where most of our tech support is, but they're not technologically ready to eliminate their cash economy. KYC is rising. There was another presentation earlier talking about KYC. In France, for example, you have to identify yourself if you're going to spend more than 1,000 euros in cash. What I've been really paying attention to, because as I'm here traveling through Africa, I am very closely paying attention to your how much money can you enter a country with and how much money you can exit a country with. And it gets kind of insane. I looked up because one of the countries I was going to visit is Ethiopia. And apparently, if I leave Ethiopia with more than 1,000 of their local money, I can get arrested. Anybody want to take a guess how much US dollars worth is 1,000, or even in Rand, because I can do that math. So 1,000 local Ethiopian money is 30 US dollars. So so you really want to keep an eye on entry and exit laws with how much money you can travel in and out. I can go in and out with up to 3,000 US dollars, but I can't leave with 30 of their own currency. Okay, so you got to be very, very careful on that. Here are some crazy laws from the US where a state passed a law saying you cannot sell your second-hand goods for cash. So if you have a bicycle and you want to sell it for $20, you somehow cannot accept a $20 bill. I actually can't find this law these days. I think they're kind of hiding it because they realized how silly that was. Germany is removing the collector market. Germany is saying, hey, if you have anything of value over 100 euros, you have to register it. So if you have a painting in your living room that is worth over 100 euros, you are supposed to tell the government you have that painting because, again, that area of Europe knows real well what it's like to hide your money in times of stress. This is World War II, where people built fake wine cellars and they hid their wine and they moved the money into art. So all of these crackdowns are happening around the world, and Bitcoin will be seen as a safe haven. So those are some of the major economic global events that will drive people into Bitcoin whose time has come. I have about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll leave 5 minutes for questions. And I do want to talk about why I believe that it's Bitcoin and only Bitcoin and not this concept of multi-currencies and multi-blockchains. One of my friends, Giacomo Zucco, had an excellent tweet where I don't like to call myself a Bitcoin maximalist. I've turned that to more a shitcoin minimalist or altcoin minimalist because I don't believe that every single person should have their own money. It's almost like barter. So what is Bitcoin maximalism? And he defines it as it's a moderate common sense view that Bitcoin perhaps maybe can succeed. Because here are your opposite extremes. You have the no coiner, which is your Nouriel Roubini, where not even Bitcoin or anything else in crypto can succeed. And then you have your multi-coiner. This is your Vitalik Buterin or Justin Sun or Dan Larimer or anyone else that creates an altcoin. Bitcoin is infinitely replicatable, and my clone of it is best, even though none of them, I believe, are decentralized. So that is your Nouriel versus Vitalik. I break up the entire crypto space into a 4-part Venn diagram. We have the proof of work coins. We have the ICOs and airdrops. We have the blockchains, which are databases. And then we have proof of stake or proof of something other than work. And of course, a lot of these things intersect. Real quick, I talked about Bitcoin the whole time, so I do want to talk about blockchain. What is blockchain? Well, since the word blockchain was not in Satoshi's white paper, where does the word come from? It comes from right here. It was a comment Satoshi put in the Bitcoin code. And it says when they solve proof of work, they broadcast the block to everyone, and the block is added to the blockchain. He was just describing the way proof of work works. One more great tweet. When you hear someone says, I'm building this blockchain, I'm solving all of Bitcoin's problems, be real careful and really look into, does that person, how does he know what Bitcoin's problems are? What qualifies him to solve Bitcoin's problems? Because Bitcoin didn't just come randomly. Bitcoin was the result of over a decade of research of trying to solve the problem. Here's an example of people trying to solve the problem to create Bitcoin. Of course, here it is. Personally, I like the idea of Hashcash. That was Adam Back's work from the late 90s. If and only if it's structured like a real currency, as opposed to simply proof of work. In the real world, you pay for resources used. In many cases, this should also apply to peer-to-peer and other computer systems. Of course, getting Hashcash workable as a real currency is extremely difficult. I've thought of a scheme that would work. Coins are signed by owner and can only be changed, signed to a different owner by the owner. Except you need a decentralized, central database of all the Hashcash that's been minted. Unworkable. Shit. Spend twice problem. When was this written and who wrote it? So this was written by the 15-year-old Peter Todd on a Saturday afternoon emailing with Hal Finney in 2001. So these are the people that were trying to solve this problem. And Satoshi finally did it, or the group Satoshi finally did it in 2009. And these people, well, Hal Finney is no longer with us. Peter Todd still is, and several others that were involved. I do want to wrap this up. I want to mention real quick why I no longer believe in Litecoin, and well, I never really did, but why Litecoin can't compete. And that's because also from Saifedean's book that pointed out real well that while silver was great money alongside gold, because silver was the micropayment to gold, in modern technology, if we go back to the gold standard, gold will be backing digital money. So you can spend gold at any scale. You don't need a micropayment. There's no longer a silver to gold. Silver will lose its monetary property over time, unless you think we're going back to a world with no electricity. Okay? So once Lightning Network is fully solving the micropayment problem, there will be no need for Litecoin. And once we have full fungibility in Bitcoin as a second layer solution, there will not be a need for these privacy-centric tokens that no one really uses even today very much. All right, I'll end it there. I might have time for one or two questions, but please check me out on YouTube. I have lots of different presentations, lots of different podcasts. And if you're in the area of the conferences right there, Unconfiscatable, Financial Summit, or Understanding Bitcoin, please check those out. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tone. I can see one hand at the back. Carl, there's a question there.
Should we have a microphone coming around?
Yeah.
Hi, Tone. That was a great talk. I really enjoyed it, maybe because I agreed with all of it. You will be familiar with the stock-to-flow writings of Plan B on Twitter.
Yes.
I'm curious if that all holds up in your estimation, because I'm not a statistician, but apparently it's been validated. What is your gut feel or your educated feel on that paper?
Yeah, so the stock-to-flow was initially introduced in Saifedean's book, and Plan B, made it his, life's work to try and apply it to the actual price of Bitcoin in order to project the future price of Bitcoin. Now, it has been holding up fairly well up to this point. Now, I do think that it's a little optimistic because there are short-term fluctuations. I also think that it's going to fall a little bit short. I do believe that the price of Bitcoin will go up over time. Do I expect Bitcoin to be 100,000 by the end of next year, like the stock-to-flow model of Plan B says? It would be great. I would be very happy. But realistically, I'm not expecting that. So I think that model will be adjusted. I think adoption of Bitcoin is actually slowed by all of these other cryptocurrencies and people, selling you fake Bitcoins left and right. So I think that has slowed us down. I think I really like the crypto space better in 24, during the last bubble than this most recent one, because everyone was a Bitcoiner. Everyone was trying to get businesses to accept Bitcoin. Everyone was on the same page, and Bitcoin could have really taken off with mass adoption. But today, everyone's promoting their own currency instead of Bitcoin. So it'll take longer, but I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty confident Bitcoin will still win. I don't hold any other crypto except Bitcoin.
Maximalist. But anyway, that's not my question. My question is...
wait for the mic for the recordings.
Yeah.
Or I can repeat your question.
Okay.
Oh, there's a mic over there. Sorry. Oh, yeah, we'll get you after. Yeah.
Hi,
Maybe
Ken.
I know my time is up, but I'll answer them quick. Yeah.
Do you think Bitcoin has healed from the ICO craze?
Bitcoin has healed?
Yes, the price.
I do. Look, the chances that Bitcoin will fall below 3,000 to me is now very, very small. As all of you know that watch me, I'm like a perpetual bear. I am expecting Bitcoin to fall a little more here. But after the halving, I do expect Bitcoin to start to rise. This whole coronavirus scare and the economic slowdown is also going to hurt Bitcoin a little bit. But yeah, Bitcoin has recovered from the ICO. I think that stupidity is past us. But people are still getting caught in Ponzi schemes like the Plus token and God knows what else. I know Triple M was rampant here. And real quick, I'll try to answer in 2 sentences.
I'm just concerned about just last week, India, the Supreme Court actually has abolished the ban, and then South Korea came out with something awesome to,
Well, India, yes. What was the other one?
So India and then South Korea.
South Korea. I don't remember. I haven't heard of South Korea news.
It's like now the exchanges are allowed to, do business and.
Oh, great. Look, in India, that's not going to make much of a difference. Like all the exchanges, all the businesses already shut down. So just because the central bank said it's not a crime doesn't mean that the financial sector is. They'll find other ways to slow it down. Again, I'm looking for. South Korea is also good. Look, eventually people will just use it. As much as some countries don't like the internet, there's not much they can do about it, right?
So you think that did not actually influence? It's strange that all this news came within such a short period, and within the same period we have price drop from 9,000.
No, it's independent of that. The price drop, I believe, has more to do with the economic slowdown when people lose their jobs because of this disruption. You're not going to go out and buy speculative currency like Bitcoin. All right, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.